Welcome to another episode of Divorce and Child Custody Discussion, where I talk candidly about the legal, emotional, and practical sides of divorce and raising kids across two homes. I'm Brian A. Victor, a family law attorney and mediator, law school professor, and overall advocate for healthy co-parenting. And today, we're going to dive into what co-parenting really means, why it's important, and I'll provide some practical tips for doing it well. Whether you're newly separated or you've been navigating this path for a while, this episode is for you. Now, before we get started, I'd like to thank all my loyal listeners. The listenership of this podcast grows each episode, and you, the listener, are the reason I produce this podcast. So thank you for your continued support. And remember, if you haven't already done so, be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming podcast episodes. Additionally, I want to thank Feedspot. They named this podcast one of the top 15 divorce podcasts to listen to. And I'm happy to report, just recently, this podcast was named one of the top 100 divorce podcasts, one of the top 40 mediation podcasts, and number 2 in a list of the top 30 best child custody podcasts by Million Podcasts. I want to thank them for their support, and I appreciate these amazing accolades. And remember, as always, the goal of this podcast is to educate, and nothing in this podcast constitutes legal advice or creates an attorney-client relationship. Okay, now on to the podcast. So, what is co-parenting? Well, co-parenting is more than just splitting time with your children. It's a commitment to work together, respectfully and cooperatively as parents, even though you're no longer partners. It means keeping your child's best interests at the center of your decisions, not your feelings about your ex. Now, this sounds easy on paper, I'm sure, but in practice, it can be incredibly hard. There's a lot of emotion, history, and sometimes resentment. But here's the deal. Co-parenting isn't about you and your ex. It's about your children. Your children didn't choose this situation, but they're counting on both of you to make it work. So, why is co-parenting important, and why does it matter? Well, children do better when their parents can communicate effectively, set consistent expectations, and avoid conflict in front of them. Now, this doesn't mean you have to be best friends with your co-parent, and really, most likely you won't be. You just need to be civil and consistent. Research shows that children in cooperative co-parenting arrangements tend to have better emotional health, academic outcomes, and self-esteem. They feel safer and more supported, and they don't feel like they have to choose sides, which is one of the most painful things a child can experience during a divorce. So let's talk about some ground rules for healthy co-parenting. And it's time to get practical here. So here are 5 ground rules that can make co-parenting smoother. First, communicate with purpose. Keep your messages focused on the children. Text or email can be better than phone calls sometimes, especially if tensions are high between the co-parents. Use shared calendars or parenting apps like Our Family Wizard or Talking Parents to keep everything organized. Secondly, consistency is the key. Try to maintain similar rules, routines, and discipline across both households. Now, that doesn't mean you have to parent identically because you're not going to do that. However, big discrepancies like bedtime at 8 p.m. in one house and midnight in the other really can confuse and stress your child, and that's what we're trying to avoid. Third, don't badmouth the other parent. I understand there's that temptation. I get it. However, no matter how tempted you are, kids will internalize what you say, and negative talk about their other parent can feel like an attack on them. You can vent to a therapist or a friend, just not your child. Fourth, flexibility is a strength. All right, look, life happens. We all know that. But willing to swap weekends or make adjustments when necessary, really important. If you expect flexibility, you have to give it too. I tell my clients in mediation that at some point, you are going to need to make changes to your parenting plan because something important is going to come up. When that happens, you want the other parent to be willing to adjust the schedule for you. So it's important that you adjust the schedule for them when they ask. And the fifth ground rule for healthy co-parenting, finally, here it is, put it in writing. Have a clear parenting plan in place. It should cover holidays, decision-making authority, travel, education, healthcare, all of it. The more detailed, the fewer misunderstandings. And the fewer misunderstandings, the less time you're going to have arguing with the other parent, and the less time you're going to find yourself in court for silly little things that you could have resolved if you could have communicated with each other. All right, now let's talk about high conflict, because there's a lot of high conflict people and high conflict situations out there. I get it. All right. So I know in some cases, co-parenting isn't cooperative. It's conflict-driven. Maybe your ex is difficult, manipulative, or just plain uncooperative. That's where parallel parenting might be the better approach. It's a more structured style with minimal direct communication. You each parent independently during your time with the children, and interactions are limited and highly structured. You can still protect your child's well-being in a high-conflict situation, but remember, it takes boundaries, documentation, and support. In some cases, involving a family therapist, parenting coordinator, or even going back to court may be necessary. As I've often mentioned on this podcast, a co-parenting class can do wonders to help you and your co-parent work better together and focus on the needs of your child. All right, so remember, co-parenting is a marathon, not a sprint. There are going to be setbacks, but every time you choose to put your child's needs above old arguments, you are building a more stable and loving environment for them. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be committed. Well, that's it for today's episode. If you found this helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone going through a similar journey. And if you have any questions about parenting plans, legal custody, or anything else family law related, you can contact me at www.brianvictorlaw.com, and I might cover your question in a future episode. Thanks again for listening to Divorce and Child Custody Discussion. Take care of yourselves and your children.